In the heart of the Amazon rainforest, the forest appears dense, stable, and unchanged. But beneath the canopy, this landscape functions as a system shaped by forces that are rarely seen. One of those forces is the jaguar. It is seldom visible, yet its influence reaches far beyond the brief moments when it is seen. Not all predators shape ecosystems through constant action. Some do so through presence alone, altering behavior without direct contact. The jaguar belongs to this second group. Its role is not defined by frequent encounters, but by the expectations it creates across the forest. Other animals respond not to what the jaguar is doing, but to where it exists. Movement, timing, and routes begin to shift around that presence. Because of this, the jaguar does not need to move often. The forest reorganizes itself in advance, adjusting to a risk that may never appear. To understand how jaguars shape the Amazon, the idea of action must be set aside. What matters here is presence, not movement. The jaguar's body is compact and grounded, built low to the surface of the Amazon rainforest. This structure favors balance and control over speed. Short limbs and a dense torso shift weight inward, keeping the jaguar's center of mass stable as it moves across uneven forest terrain. This design reduces wasted motion. Each step is deliberate, conserving energy while limiting unnecessary exposure within the forest. Power in the jaguar is compressed rather than extended. Muscle and bone emphasize stability instead of long acceleration across the terrain. This physical economy allows the jaguar to remain present without announcing itself, blending naturally into the structure of the surrounding forest. Minimal movement means minimal signals. Other animals receive fewer cues, yet remain aware of the risk embedded in the landscape. In this way, the jaguar's body becomes a regulatory tool, subtly shaping behavior across the forest without the need for frequent encounters. Control, not speed, defines how the jaguar fits into the Amazon. Its physical design sets the conditions that the forest responds to. Across the Amazon rainforest, jaguars divide space without fences or lines. Their territories exist as patterns of presence that only the forest seems to understand. These boundaries are not enforced through constant confrontation. They emerge gradually, shaped by where jaguars spend time and where they do not. Other animals learn these patterns without contact. Routes, timing, and resting places adjust to avoid overlapping with jaguar space. This adjustment does not remove species from the forest. It redistributes them, spreading pressure more evenly across the landscape. Paths through the forest begin to shift. Trails near rivers, ridges, and clearings subtly change as animals respond to unseen boundaries. Over time, these invisible maps stabilize. The forest learns where risk is higher and where movement becomes safer over repeated cycles. Because these maps persist, pressure rarely concentrates in one place, preventing any single area from being pushed beyond its limits. The jaguar rarely needs to reinforce these boundaries. The system maintains itself through memory and shared expectation across the forest. Territory, in this sense, is not a claim of dominance. It functions as a stabilizing pattern that helps keep the Amazon in balance. In the Amazon rainforest, the presence of a jaguar introduces caution rather than panic. The forest does not freeze. It recalibrates. Animals do not vanish from jaguar territory. They continue to move, but with greater structure and heightened awareness across the landscape. Activity shifts subtly across time. Some movements occur earlier, others later, reducing overlap without direct confrontation. Space shifts as well. Areas of frequent use expand and contract as animals respond to perceived risk across repeated cycles. Because pressure spreads across the landscape, no single location absorbs continuous strain, allowing the system to remain balanced over time. Plants benefit from this redistribution. Recovery occurs in places that might otherwise be overused, allowing vegetation to regain stability. Along rivers and forest edges, This balance becomes especially important. These zones are highly productive, but also among the most fragile parts of the system. The jaguar's presence moderates activity without visible enforcement. Fear exists, but it remains controlled, never escalating into chaos across the forest system. This is regulation without spectacle, a system shaped by restraint rather than disruption, operating quietly across the forest. Within the Amazon rainforest, jaguars are closely tied to rivers. These waterways function as corridors that connect habitats rather than divide them. Rivers shape movement through the forest, concentrating life along their edges. Jaguars occupy these spaces without dominating them. Because jaguars use river corridors consistently, other animals gradually adjust how and when they approach water, spreading activity across time. This adjustment protects the riverbanks from constant pressure. Access spreads across time instead of concentrating in one moment. Edges between water and forest are among the most productive zones in the Amazon, but they are also the easiest parts of the system to destabilize. Jaguar presence moderates how these edges are used, allowing vegetation and soil to recover naturally between repeated disturbances. As a result, water systems and forest systems remain closely linked, with neither able to operate in isolation from the other over long periods of time. This connectivity supports fish, birds, mammals, and plants that depend on stable access to both land and water across the ecosystem. By remaining present along these corridors, jaguars help maintain the links that quietly hold the Amazon together over time, stabilizing connections that would otherwise weaken. When jaguars disappear from parts of the Amazon rainforest, the forest does not collapse immediately. At first, everything appears unchanged. Territorial boundaries begin to fade quietly. The invisible maps that once structured movement gradually lose their clarity over time. Animals start to move more freely through spaces that were once moderated. Activity becomes less distributed across time and space. Pressure begins to concentrate. Areas near water and open clearings experience repeated use, with little time left for recovery between disturbances. Vegetation responds slowly. Young plants struggle to establish as disturbance becomes more frequent across the affected areas. Soil compaction increases, altering how water moves through the landscape as small changes begin to cascade through the system. None of these shifts are dramatic. They unfold gradually, often escaping notice until the system has already changed in fundamental ways. What disappears first is not the forest itself, but the regulation that once kept its processes aligned and functioning together. The jaguar is often treated as a symbol of power, but in the Amazon rainforest, symbolism is irrelevant. What matters is function. The forest does not respond to stories or meaning. It responds only to whether its systems continue to operate as expected over time. Jaguars do not manage the Amazon intentionally. Their bodies and daily routines simply create conditions that the forest gradually adjusts to over time. Presence shapes behavior. Behavior shapes movement. Over time, that movement determines how recovery unfolds across space and time. As long as jaguars remain present, these processes stay aligned, even when no direct interaction is visible within the forest. Remove the jaguar, and nothing dramatic happens at first. The forest continues to stand, appearing stable and unchanged to the untrained eye. But alignment begins to loosen. Pressure concentrates, recovery slows, and ecological patterns gradually simplify across the landscape. These changes unfold slowly, beyond the timescale of immediate attention, but never beyond consequence for the system itself. The Amazon does not measure importance by size or charisma. It measures whether its systems continue to function quietly and reliably over time. In this system, the jaguar is not a symbol to admire. It is a working component that helps keep the forest whole and functioning over time.